So I am so excited about today's talk. This is my good friend, Kate Phelps. It might shock some of you to learn that in my former life, I was a camp counselor.
Yes.
So crazy, right? Kate Phelps is awesome. All right. She just came out with a book that I just got signed. I'm so excited. Unfortunately, you guys don't get books, but if you want one, where
They only printed one. So
just one. This is it. We will send out a QR code or something if you're interested. Just email me, please. All right. So it's called Digital Girlhood. It examines American teen girls' relationship with social media. It's now available through Temple University Press. Dr. Phelps frequently gives talks and facilitates events on histories of anti-fatness, weight stigma, the wellness industry, and approaches to size-inclusive and weight-neutral care. So please help me welcoming Dr. Phelps.
Welcome, everybody, and good morning. You're awake. Hi. It's so nice to see you. I would like to thank Laura Hanks for extending the invitation. And to Laura Bizzuto for being game, for having me, and to Jamie Reeds for making it all happen, making sure that I got here on time. Thank you, Jamie. Appreciate that. Thank you for the introduction, Laura. My name is Dr. Kate Phelps, and I'm really excited to be here today. I'm honored to have been invited. And I want to give a quick shout out because I saw Jenny Higgins is on the digital. And hi, Jenny. It's nice to see you in virtual space. So the title of my talk today is Weight Loss or Wellness, the Shifting Online Landscape of Weight Stigma and Diet Culture in the Age of Ozempic. And we are very much in the age of Ozempic. I cannot even begin to fathom covering all of my passion and interest in this particular subject matter in the time that we have. So I hope you'll bear with me as we do a little bit of sociology, a little bit of history, in illuminating this current landscape. I believe it's really important that we begin with a land acknowledgement because it informs our shared past and our shared future and the context in which we're learning here at UW-Madison, which is a land-grant institution. Des Jope, or the land in and around what is called Madison, Wisconsin by the colonial state, has been stewarded by the Ho-Chunk Nation since time immemorial. In 1832, the Ho-Chunk were forced by the U.S. government to cede all their territory in Wisconsin, south of the Wisconsin River. In 1837, they were forced to cede the rest of their lands and never received full payment enumerated in the treaty. Many Ho-Chunk refused to leave and, when removed, kept returning to their home territory. It is from these tribal members that the Wisconsin Ho-Chunk Nation descends, though they were not federally recognized until 1963. With respect, we recognize the inherent sovereignty of the 12 First Nations of Wisconsin. With a spirit of humility and openness, we pledge to do the hard work of reflection, of truth-telling, and reparation so that we can move toward transformative healing. And I believe part of that reparation is how we continue to engage our curiosity and knowledge building around this and around the land that we are on, and to just provide a little bit of context for where we are. Of the 72 counties in Wisconsin, Menominee County, I want to highlight for a moment, is nearly an 80% Native population by demographic, and it also has the highest rate of food insecurity in the state at more than 20%. So as a group that I think is collectively invested in better health outcomes, in particular for under-recognized communities and those that have been marginalized across various axes of identities, I invite us to consider the nuances of how we explore truth around this question of weight as it relates to health, both at the individual and public level. So some of what we're going to do today is talk about and describe how weight stigma and diet culture has evolved from before the onset of social media. If we can remember that, it's a baby, isn't it? It's just an infant. We have no idea what it's doing, and it's wild out there right now. Having just written a book about it, I'm like, wow, are we watching the downfall? I don't know, let's see what happens. So before the onset of social media to this contemporary moment, certainly diet culture goes much farther back than that, and we will spend just a moment in the 19th century in just a minute. We will identify key moments from the last 2 decades that have influenced our current landscape of weight stigma and diet culture on social media. We'll analyze some advertisements and directives on social media and explain how different consumers are being disproportionately impacted, in particular around this GLP-1 class of drugs that has become a major topic of conversation in the last couple of years. And we'll also talk about some resources to decrease weight stigma in clinical practice. Okay, we're gonna watch an advertisement. Did anybody watch the Super Bowl? Did anybody see this ad? Yeah, okay, it was something. And listen, I'm someone that really tries to not moralize food. I think that gets us into trouble in a lot of ways as we talk about weight loss and wellness and behavioral health and the kinds of choices that people make. Everybody is making choices out of constrained choice, right? The circumstances in which they are in. And this is, it very much maps onto how we have moralized body over time. And this has disproportionate impacts related to gender, certainly related to race, certainly related to socioeconomic status and ability. And the point here that I'm wanting to pull out is that it was capitalism all along, haha, right? So amongst commercials for chips and candy and soda and alcohol and food of all kinds came this Hims and Hers commercial, which is a telehealth company that is selling compounded versions of GLP-1 drugs to consumers. And I want us to watch it. There's a lot going on in this 1-minute ad that they paid $15 million to have air during the Super Bowl. Is it gonna do it, do you think? Okay, let's see. It's a lot, so I'm sorry it's a lot for 7:30 in the morning, but it's important that we see it, I think. Available on YouTube if you would like to see it. It's a 1-minute-long ad, and it sort of begins with this, it's playing Childish Gambino's This Is America over the top of the ad. It is this very chaotic scene that's really capitalizing on a lot of fear around fatness, and showing examples of, like, there's a moment where a Big Mac is squished with a hammer or something. For some inexplicable reason, we see a lion attacking a wildebeest at a certain point in the ad. And then it kind of shifts into this, as you can imagine, this very sort of aesthetic wellness moment of people doing yoga. Everything is green. People are sitting by the pool, right? And all of this happens within a minute. Hims and Hers received a lot of backlash about this advertisement. The final line of the ad is "Join us in the fight for a healthier America." And what's so notable about this is that they are taking a systemic critique, or like they're engaging a systemic critique in the ad, where they're saying it's not your body, you're not at fault. It is the system that is keeping us sick and stuck. So Hims and Hers is trying to situate themselves as sort of anti-establishment, is somehow set apart from the larger diet industry. They are very much a part of the diet industry, quite squarely, right? Millions of people watched this ad during the Super Bowl. The backlash around it was primarily surrounding consumer protections. These telehealth companies do not have to indicate side effects in the way that FDA-approved drugs need to, and so there was a lot of backlash around pharmaceutical interests as well. Large drug manufacturing companies such as Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly do not like telehealth companies and med spas. They don't like the compounded versions of these drugs are being touted in such unregulated ways, which is exactly where we are right now. Although literally this week, the news came out that the shortage is over. So now companies are sending cease and desist letters and attempting to sue pharmaceutical drug manufacturers that are making compounded versions of these drugs. It's really interesting. There's a lot going on. I have been in an Ozempic wormhole. I promise I have other interests. I really do. It just doesn't feel that way right now. In March of 2024, Oprah premiered this special entitled Shame, Blame, and the Weight Loss Revolution. And since 2022, which is a really notable time because we're sort of still in the midst, but coming out of the kind of shelter and isolation of COVID, Ozempic has become a household name. And it's been on the market for a while. It got FDA approval in 2017, and it was approved to treat type 2 diabetes. And then Wegovy, it's the same drug. It's just offered in a higher dosage for weight management or weight loss. But it has absolutely become a household name, and it's used as a proxy for most GLP-1 agonists. this, right? Kind of like Kleenex. Kleenex is a brand name, but we use it for every facial tissue that we see. We're like, give me a Kleenex, right? During this advertisement, during this episode of Shame, Blame, and the Weight Loss Revolution, Oprah referred to obesity as a disease of the brain. And I know that there is ongoing research around how and in what ways people gain weight, why they sustain higher weights. We know empirically it's very difficult for people to achieve long-term sustainable weight loss. We know that efforts towards dieting fail, and that is also the diet industry by design. It's supposed to fail. I don't know that you can make an argument to me that capitalist interests are invested in our wellness. Like, I think rather than attempting to achieve some element of balance, we are meant to be sort of in a constant cycle of deprivation and indulgence. Look at how food is sold to us. Look at how food is gendered. You can get yogurt is advertised to women, but you can go to a grocery store and get yogurt for men. It's yogurt, is what it is. And it's the way that the food industry, the way that big pharma, the way that beauty, the way that healthcare as an industry are tied up together, has created an environment which I would make the argument we are constantly sort of medium scared. And we have been told that the body is a project that we need to constantly be working on, that we need to be constantly seeking to improve. So Oprah states during this episode that obesity is a disease of the brain. Well, that's not how obesity is defined, right? Obesity is defined based on the BMI scale, based on the BMI index, right? Body mass index, excuse me. The national, and I won't spend much time on this, your doctors, you know what's going on, right? But across the NIH, the WHO, and the AMA, there are consistent definitions that are situating obesity as being understood as abnormal or excessive fat accumulation. I really want to point out part of the NIH definition here, because the AMA named obesity as a disease in 2013. A big reasoning, and they did that against the recommendations of their own committee of experts that had done over a year of research and then said, don't do this. We don't have enough justification to refer to this as a disease. And they did anyway. And part of that is a utilitarian reason for lessening some of the stigma around higher weight. It has not worked. It has not done that. If anything, it has re-entrenched stigma. The NIH definition says that there are no specific symptoms of overweight and obesity, which I think is really, really important. Because as we talk about correlation, as we talk about association, even as we want to talk about causation, I think we need to be willing to reckon with a much larger macro-systemic critique of our systems as they stand. Because sort of the best response we have had to this, and let me be very clear, these medications are saving lives. I am in favor of medications that are helping people, right? And in particular, allowing them to make the individual choices they would like to make about their body narratives and their health. But if we're not willing to have a broader conversation around our food industry, around access to care, around systemic poverty, around the amount of food waste that we have, around what the USDA subsidizes, around what we advertise on TV, then we are not invested in people's overall well-being and health. And it goes well beyond weight, right? I could talk about it for a long time. Okay. So what am I interested in, right? I'm really interested in body politics. I'm really interested in how people internalize health directives. How do we learn about health? So body politics, and it's something that I'm really broadly interested in. I teach about it in every different which way. Certainly, I teach a body politics class right now. And just to give you an idea, we cover things like colorism. We talk about gender. We talk about genderqueer embodiments. We certainly talk about bodies in the context of labor, like bodies in the workplace, pregnant embodiments. our bodies are not separate from the institutions of which they are a part. So body politics are these practices and policies through which society regulates our bodies. You all got up today, you put on clothes. We all have to do that. Now we get some level of freedom around how we express ourselves in that way, although it really depends on the context that we are in. So that's an example of body politics, right? There's elements of social control that are regulating human bodies, that are putting us, that are can quite literally move us through space. The military-industrial complex is an example of hyper-stringent body politics, or our system of our prison system, right? Examples of where bodies have to be in a very particular place at a particular time. But in general, we have a tremendous amount of bodily regulation across our social institutions, and we are constantly navigating this push-pull between what level of autonomy and agency and control we have over our bodies versus how we are being regulated. So how are we learning about health? We are learning about it from our families. We are learning about it through education systems. We are certainly learning about it through media. And now more than ever, we are learning about it through social media. Sometimes we are learning about it through the clinical setting, through the directives that we have with a collaborative, hopefully a collaborative relationship with a healthcare provider. But often, people are not in the practice, the general hobby of reading JAMA, or reading the Lancet, or reading the New England Journal of Medicine, and indeed we don't know how to read those things and then have those results explained to us, sort of the everyday individual human who is invested and interested in their overall health. So health behavior, right, comes down to common sense in a lot of ways. We're supposed to make common sense decisions, but that is inherently related to where we are from, the kind of education that we have, our family members, what sort of access to food we have, access to medication and care, personal choice, education, social circumstance, identities. I don't think that we can't make the argument, okay. We make it very acceptable for certain people with a certain body size to engage in behavior in any way that they want. And we do not police that. And we do police it for higher weight people. And we're not willing to ask a question about what their behaviors actually are. Are they getting enough sleep? Are they safe? Are they joyful? Those questions that we are making all kinds of assumptions about people's overall health narratives. This can be really dangerous. People in higher weight bodies are often suffering from eating disorders, but we're not diagnosing that. When we look at someone who is in an impoverished circumstance, who is relying on SNAP benefits over the month, and those SNAP benefits run out, and then that person has to go to a food pantry. We have safety nets under safety nets under safety nets. In a country that hunger should not exist, period, point blank. It doesn't have to exist. It's a policy choice. So when we do that and we say, and then that person, let's say, goes through binge eating behavior because they don't know when they are going to have food again. That is not who we imagine as being diagnosed with a clinical eating disorder, but that is disordered eating, right? And I would argue that overall, given the body politics system that we are in, that most of us have if not disordered relationship with food, a tense relationship. It's a tension, right? Because we are constantly being sold, you want this, indulge in this, you want this, or you need to atone for your bad behavior. So where does this come from? Oh, so much. This is not just science. Certainly science is part of it, but science is also not apolitical. How we ask questions, the kinds of things that we research, who gets involved in clinical trials, how data is distilled, and then who gets access to things, right? None of that is apolitical, and it's not ahistorical. It is bound up with, there's certainly religious tenets, moralizing of bodies, come on, good, bad food, cheat days, etc. I mean, Oprah made her, Oprah has done so much. She was on network television for 25 years. And one of the most watched episodes of her 25 years of network television was in 1988 when she wheeled a wagon full of 67 pounds of fat across the stage and advocated for her liquid diet. We watched her weight cycle for 30 plus years, and it made her human to us. But part of that was because she created a confessional platform. We have to atone, right? We have programs like Weight Watchers and Jenny Craig and Nutrisystem, and now we're in this absolute wild west of these GLP-1 class of drugs, which are effective. They are effective. And it's also, I would argue, we're in a really insidious and fairly dangerous space right now. We get a lot of information about our bodies and the value of our bodies from media. Western philosophical tradition tells us that the mind can champion the body, that we have a mind-body dualism, and this has certainly worked its way into our social institutions and industry. We measure the value of bodies based on how productive they can be, right, within the workforce. This is, and one of the arguments that I see sort of touted out around the costs of obesity over time is people taking too many sick days, like that sort of thing. And this gets sort of blown up into large statistics that we're not looking at with any kind of critical lens. I want to make sure, okay, we're doing great. I will not spend much time on this, but these are some ideas that really inform my work and my teaching. I am really, really interested in how anti-fat bias and weight stigma is showing up across people's experiences, not just within the clinical setting, but also in how they consume, in the relationships that they have with their families, within their communities. Weight stigma is really pervasive. It is a very acceptable form of bias because we have conflated health with thinness. And that is not coming to us directly from objective, empirical, scientific research. That is sociopolitical and it is cultural, right? And we have a value systems around bodies that tells us which bodies are good and which are bad. And anti-fatness is very pervasive in that way. One of the things I wanted to emphasize is this framework of healthism, this preoccupation with personal health as being a primary focus and a definition of the achievement of a life of worth. And in other words, we find it very suspicious if people are not notably or visibly seeking optimal health for themselves. But I would argue in many ways, health is a social construct. It is not one size fits all. In the course of my life, I'm about to be 38. Coffee has been good for me and bad for me. Egg yolks have been great or the devil, right? Depending upon, like, red wine, we don't know. And all of this is being distilled through sort of everyday popular media and really depends on the kind of access to information that people have. And we will spend a little bit of time talking about weight neutral care as well. I just want to take us to the 19th century real quick. If you can see this advertisement over here on our lefts, this is from the late 19th century, so late 1800s, and it says at the top, no diet, no baths, no exercise. Sound familiar? Lose weight quick without having to make any sacrifice. Fat, the enemy that is shortening your life, banished. How? With sanitized tapeworms, jar packed for a fair form. And then over here on the right, we have a very recent weight loss advertisement for semaglutide with a sort of regimen for it. The thing that I really want to emphasize here is that well over a century apart, we are using a sexualized version of the female form to sell this product, right? And that absolutely tracks over time with the vast majority of people that are consuming and partaking within a quote unquote conventional diet industry are female and feminine identifying people, right? In the 18th and 19th century, holy smokes, so much was going on. That long 18th century, the age of enlightenment, this is when race science starts to make its way into the forefront, and we're actually creating categories of race that are distinguishing whiteness from blackness. And as part of that, and that primarily used the female form, these white European men making these categorizations, we're looking at the bodies of women, right? Over time. I want to really emphasize the work of Sabrina Strings, who wrote Fearing the Black Body in 2019, an exceptional piece of scholarship around the histories of how we have come to conceptualize fatness in the way that we have. Also the work of Deshawn Harrison and Belly of the Beast, and their work Belly of the Beast from 2021. In effect, what happened during the end of the 18th into the 19th and into the earliest 20th century. I mean, 19th century, we had the sort of ostensible end of slavery. It took on different manifestations in different forms and a system of policing. We also had Reconstruction. We had massive waves of immigration, first from Western Europe, then from Eastern Europe. And so much cultural anxiety and economic upheaval during this time. And then as we turn into the 20th century, we have the Great Migration. Millions and millions of people from Black communities leaving southern states to go to coastal regions and concentrated urban regions in the north. This changed the landscape of our society in a way that I don't think we give nearly enough credit. Our modern understandings of fatness are rooted, and this is where the work of Harrison and Strings comes in, are rooted in the transatlantic slave trade and Protestantism and how it has showed up in sort of our capitalist understandings, because we are being sold health. We are being sold a quote unquote better life at pretty much every turn. My phone sells me weight loss all day long. That's all it does. Kate, you clearly want a GLP-1 injectable. I'm listening to you, and it's like, you got it wrong. A very non-exhaustive timeline here. Anybody remember the 90s? Whoa, it was something. Everything was low fat, fad diets, hyper thinness during this time. This is just naming a few. We had South Beach, we had blood type diet, the fen weight loss pill, which was then taken off the market because it had catastrophic results. The Zone, Atkins, and the list goes on. Heroin chic was in at this time, as it was called, and feminism was out. That's a really simplistic framing, but it's also true. We had a pretty significant backlash to feminism at the end of the 1980s and 1990s. Jumping ahead to the 9/11 terrorist attacks in 2001, people are like, Kate, what does 9/11 have to do with our understandings of fatness? So much. I cannot overstate that. So much. In December of 2001, Tommy Thompson was the director of Health and Human Services, and he gave a speech approximately 3 months after the 9/11 attacks, in which he called upon every American to lose 10 pounds as a patriotic gesture. And then in 2003, Richard Carmona, who was the Surgeon General at the time, referred to obesity as the terror within, and indicated that the obesity epidemic would dwarf any terrorist threat that was coming from a foreign entity. So our war on terror was entangled. It was enmeshed with the war on obesity in the early part of the 2000s. Then we see Super Size Me, the documentary that came out in 2004, one of the most popular documentaries of all time. They are still showing that thing in health classes in the United States. Unbelievable. It's not real. It's not real. Then we had The Biggest Loser that ran for many, many seasons. It was on primetime television as like family watching hour, in which we made spectacles out of fat people, and we put them in this situation where they were put on a ranch to lose however much amount of weight and then monetarily celebrated when they did that and then thrust back out into the real world. We watched that happen season over season over season. This statistic of 300,000 deaths per year just got locked in to the early 2000s. And in between 2002 and 2004, that statistic of 300,000 obesity deaths per year was published more than 17,000 times in a 2-year period in popular news media. So this really takes hold. And then social media came along. MySpace came along in 2003, YouTube came along in 2005, and what we did see was people bringing their body narratives into the online space, right? It really changed a lot in how we were talking about visible weight loss and weight gain narratives. But also what we saw is what I would argue is the only counter narrative we have seen to this visibly, which is this body positive idea. And I have my qualms with it because I'm more interested in a structural critique, and body positivity to me feels it's very individual. I think it's great as a framework in a lot of ways. It helps people. We saw more size inclusion. We saw a larger emphasis on a multiplicity of bodies because of the way that this was showing up online. And weight loss begins to rebrand itself to wellness. Weight Watchers, for example, stopped being Weight Watchers and then they became WW. Does anybody remember when that happened? It's the same product. It sure is. And when pathologizing fatness, just a couple more specific context and dates here. The BMI entered the clinical setting based on this Ansel Keys study in 1972 and becomes used as a screening tool for individual health, which is not ultimately what it was conceptualized to do. And we know that the BMI it doesn't work in a lot of ways to tell us much about individual health, but it's a tool that we have. In 1998, the BMI threshold changed by the National Institutes of Health to get into alignment with the WHO designations on the BMI at the time. The WHO also named obesity as a disease in 1997, but it has to be known. I know I sound like a cynic, but come on. The International Obesity Action Coalition that helped push for that decision, the majority of those people that were a part of that decision are weight loss consultants. They were directly benefiting from naming obesity as a disease in that way. They were directly benefiting from weight loss pharmaceuticals at the time. When the BMI threshold changed, it used to be designated by a assigned sex category at birth. There were different designations, right? For the sex category you were assigned at birth. And then in 1998, it dropped to 25. So above 25, you're overweight, above 30, you're obese, and then it goes up from there. Those categories have changed, and now it's obesity class 1, 2, and 3 in order to lessen some of the stigma, because morbid obesity was the lexicon we were using for a while. And when this happened, approximately 30 million people became obese overnight, right? As social media becomes established, as we are seeing more and more bodies sort of inundating our everyday, it really takes hold in the 2010s. And social media becomes a part of everyday life. Really very ubiquitous, widespread social media use. As I mentioned, 2013, the AMA names obesity as a disease. And between sort of 2017 and 2021, the GLP-1 drug class is entering mainstream discourse in a new way. Important for us to recognize that bodies themselves have been trends over time, right? Not what we wear, not what we put on them, bodies themselves, body sizes. And that has been a particular feminine and female condition. We don't do the same thing with men over time. So then what's going on now, right? Social media influencers are being sponsored by GLP-1 pharmaceutical companies and paid a lot of money to promote those products, whether they are using them or not. Often this is including very little transparency, very little question of ethics, or disclosures around side effects and what those drugs might do. It is predominantly white, middle-class, thin, young women that are influencing this drug on social media, and they are the least likely to need it in a life-saving way, right? Especially for folks who have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and are not able to get these medications. This misinformation and lack of information has really significant impacts on consumers. We've seen a significant increase in the private use of GLP-1 drugs, these compounded versions, this at-home management. At the moment, the average cost of a compounded semaglutide, let's say, is in the neighborhood of $300 a month, whereas a Ozempic prescription that's not covered by insurance is going to cost closer to $1,000. Right? That's not attainable for folks. $300 is not attainable for a lot of folks. And even then, I'm very suspicious, sort of like a macro approach to this, as being touted as the revolution and the potential quote unquote end to obesity. As a fat person, I just have to be like, that scares me, right? Like and what the expectation will be over time in this sort of project to eradicate fatness, which we have intrinsically connected with poor health, which quite frankly, the research shows us it's just not as simple as that, right? But that's not the dominant narrative that we're telling. And why? because weight, because we have tremendous cultural anxiety around weight and how we've conflated it with desirability, how we use it as a proxy for, like, we use weight as a way of understanding if someone is quote unquote living a good life. That's why we sell weight loss in the way that we do. I won't spend time on this, but if people would like access to slides, they're welcome to have it. I just wanted to demonstrate a table with the FDA approved dosages and medications that do exist on the market right now, versus the many versions of compounded versions of these drugs that are being sold online in the midst of this shortage. It operates as sort of this loophole that they don't require the same sort of FDA oversight when people are not able to access these drugs. Compounded version of these drugs are often including salt forms. They are not clinically tested and they are not FDA approved. So we have virtually no research on what they are doing to people over a long period of time. And I think another thing that strikes me is the misinformation around this. People thinking that they can go off of these drugs. That's not what the research, right? Like, I literally was listening to a podcast the other day and the host was like, okay, guys, telling her thousands of listeners, I'm finished with my semaglutide journey. I lost 25 pounds. I'm happy with it. I'm going off of it. And it was like, oof, did you talk to a physician? Because that's not how these work. And that information is being distilled. People are very confused about these drugs, but they know, what they do know is that they are effective. They know that they can lose weight on these drugs. And that is enough for people to really want them and outweighing that sort of risk-benefit analysis. So to me, I'm like, we need to take a much harder look at how we have constructed these ideas over time. Here's just a few recent advertisements. Oh, this classic, the pants, right? Showing the amount of weight lost. If this one here on the bottom, it's sort of hard to see, but you can see a thin-bodied, feminine presenting person in sort of a bra and underwear situation looking very joyful. And you can see the outline of a fatter figure beyond her, right? We're doing, oh, this one does it too. That one does it too, right? What is being sold here and the bodies that are being used to sell them are, again, primarily thin, white, young, seemingly cis, seemingly able-bodied people. And to me, there's sort of an underlying, there's a tone here that's suggesting that use of these drugs is going to deliver you to a better life. That's not new by any stretch of the imagination. That's what any diet industry company has capitalized on over time. It is often not about health. The health narrative to me feels very secondary to the way that these bodies are being presented, to the way that the drugs are being presented. Here's just a few more from a very cursory Google search and where you can find them. Facebook, Instagram, Etsy, specific med spas and telehealth companies. But this is a rapidly shifting landscape because from what we understand, the shortages of these drugs is ending, right? Sort of the best information we have right now is that 1 in 8 US adults have used the GLP-1 class of drugs. That's approximately 12% of the population. Many consumers are using compounded versions of these drugs. And listen, I know, because this has been like my singular focus of the last several months. Even though I have a book that came out about something very different. That's a different study on social media, but I really am just interested in how social media, how we get information and how we internalize that information. Several expert voices in hearing from MDs, from researchers, from endocrinologists, from epidemiology, from pharmacology are calling this the Wild West, right? This is the Wild West that we are in right now. We know that women are more likely to use GLP-1s We know that BIPOC women and lower socioeconomic status folks are most impacted by chronic illness, the outcomes of structural poverty, the outcomes of racialized environmental racism are most likely to experience comorbidities and poor medical outcomes. Often we view this through an obesity prevention lens versus taking a more structural approach to how we have framed fatness over time. I mean, thinking about Madison, for example. Where I live, there are 4 grocery stores, all within 0.2 miles of each other. Metcalfe's, Target, Whole Foods, and Metro Market. I can go to any of them, right? That is not the case for other parts of Madison. And then we call that a food desert, as though that is naturally occurring. That's not naturally occurring, that's structural. So in food justice circles, we call that food apartheid, because that's what that is, right? And then we are villainizing people for the quote unquote choices that they are making. And through it all, I would like us to walk back and recognize that fat people have existed, will continue to exist. And even if someone, let's say for example, let's say someone is in an obese category 2, they take a GLP-1 and they lose a certain amount of weight, right? If they are still in an obese category, based on the BMI, they will still be considered diseased, right? And we're not looking at the metabolic markers of that person. We are not asking questions about their behavior. I think that this does a great deal of harm. So I'm very much in favor of shifting how we think about, how we talk about, not that it can't be a consideration. Weight matters for medication dosage, for equipment size, for needle length, for vaccines, all of these things matter. But how we have framed fatness as a moral failure has been really, really problematic over time. Oh, is it 8:07 already? I'm gonna stop. Okay, I can stop. I'm really sorry. Here's what I want to offer really, really quick. For folks that are interested, I put an obnoxious amount of sources at the end in hopes that this encourages folks' curiosity. I love talking about this. I really, really do. There are many examples of weight bias in medicine within clinical practice. We have lack of equipment. We have sort of a prescribing weight loss as a catch-all. This has certainly happened to me. I'm someone that's been pregnant twice. I am in a higher weight body, and the amount of surveillance that I experienced during those pregnancies, even going so far as being offered an extra ultrasound based on my BMI for concern for fetal weight, or fetal size, and I was like, are you, my practitioner, concerned about this, for me? And she was like, no, I'm mandated to offer this to you based on your BMI. And that would have been an out-of-pocket cost. And if I hadn't asked that question, that's that experience that I would have had. So I don't know if that was I don't know, right? But like an everyday person, especially a pregnant person who is invested in a good outcome for that experience, is going to do what a doctor says. They are going to do what a doctor says, right? I was told I could gain 10 pounds during my pregnancy. The stress that caused, I gotta be honest, I think that did more harm than good, right? These are things I'm thinking about. I won't spend time on this, but capitalism matters. Let's just say that, right? Capitalism matters, financial interests matter, people matter, how we understand health from a genetic standpoint, biological, endocrine, epigenetics, behaviorally, social determinants. It is a much more complex picture, and we know that. So we should be addressing that as such. I know it's not easy on a structural level. I do understand that, but there are barriers. But I think if we can practice humility around that and keeping patients at the center, we'll have better health outcomes. Many sources. Here you go, whole bunch. There's a size inclusive medicine chapter here on campus. They're wonderful. I want to shout out Reagan Chastain, incredible work in this space. Association for Size Diversity in Health. So many books. These are the 2 that I was talking about earlier, Fearing the Black Body and Belly of the Beast. Also the work of Aubrey Gordon. If you want a historical approach, Amy Irvin Farrell's book is really, really excellent. All of these are fabulous sources in this space. And there's me. Thank you. If you ever want to keep talking about this, I'm so game. And here's sources. Oh, sources. Oh, more sources. Well, thank you so much. We have time for a couple questions. I was too excited about the slides. I did too many. So.
Thank you so much. That was so incredible. I was just kind of like, I guess one of my first questions for you right off the bat is like, how can, one of our residents is actually working on how we have this conversation with patients that are quote obese, that are pregnant. And unfortunately she's on maternity leave, but you guys should definitely connect.
Totally.
But I think that like how can we as physicians do a better job of having the because I like right at the end when you were talking about that, and it's like, yeah, we do talk about like the appropriate weight gain. Like that is something that I recognize it is a stressful conversation to have. But in your if tables have been switched, how would you have approached that?
I think, and okay, I don't even need to let's be clear. I'm not a healthcare practitioner. I'm a sociologist. But I have made it my business to become a part of weight inclusive community here in the Madison area. So I know size inclusive physicians, I know size inclusive caregivers who are across the healthcare spectrum. And I ask them, what are your favorite pieces of advice, the strategies that you would offer here? Here we go. These are the things that they articulated to me. And I asked several of them. One of the first ones was when you're entering that space to stay curious and to stay humble and to make sure that you're examining your biases as you are entering that space. Asking questions of your patients first. If weight feels like it must be addressed in the context of that appointment, at least asking your patient, how would you like to talk about it today? What would be most comfortable for you? Respecting patient wishes sort of across the board and how they want to address it. For me, I am someone that during that experience, those experiences of pregnancy where getting my weight felt important, I made the decision to not look at my weight, and then because it doesn't help me. It does not help me to know. It doesn't help a lot of people to know. And I would ask then my physician to share with me if there was what felt like a cause for concern, or if they wanted to sort of talk about my behaviors in that way. I know it's a screening tool that we use. We cannot rely solely on the BMI. We just can't. We know it's bad science. We know that as an individual health metric. Sharing resources and strategies with other healthcare providers. They are here, they are in this area, they are in Madison and beyond. The Association for Size, Diversity, and Health has an incredible resource and registry of physicians that are committed to changing from a weight-centered model of care to a more size-inclusive or size-neutral model of care, which I know may not operate the same way across, it's different if we're talking about orthopedics, right, for example. But even then, certain equipment like blood pressure cuffs, length of needles, gowns that can make people feel dignity in their humanity in the clinic. We need a broader multiplicity of resources here. Informed consent for patients is really, really important. And in the midst of the GLP-1 class of drugs, this is something that size-inclusive physicians that I know and have spoken to about it is a lot of concern, because patients will come barreling in there and be like, give me a drug, I want the drug, give me a drug, right? That's how much weight stigma exists internally, right? Which is why I think we need more resources within medical education, within broader elements of education. There is history behind this. It is not as simple as that. It just isn't. And we want people to be informed with what is behind this, right? I know this requires more money, more time. I know physicians are up against it, right? You get 20 minutes with a patient, right? Depending upon the context that you are in. And a final one that they really emphasized was finding ways to talk about overall sort of health goals and motivations rather than focusing on the number that that person is sort of fixated on, right? But keeping the patient at the center. There's a lot of really great resources for this if you're interested.
Time for a couple more questions.
No, I just think we probably have time.
Oh, for
One more question.
I talked a lot.
I don't remember in some of our residents weren't even born in 2001.
Right?
Yeah.
No, I know.
So, but I don't remember that, that, maybe you said that a couple months after where they set the calendar. I still don't understand what that had to do with. Like, was that just totally, was it just like, oh, by the way, you should lose 10 pounds?
Oh, no, it was
Like, that just was.
the way that it was being talked about by Tommy Thompson, by Richard Carmona, by people across the Bush administration at the time, was this general, okay, ooh, doesn't it get into it, Laura? There's some reading.
Sorry, maybe you and I can talk offline.
To boil it down, even now, if you go to the website for Partnership for a Healthier America, which is part of Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign, which they paid for by taking money from SNAP, from food stamps. Oh, to deep dark web. Tis the deep dark web. But anyway, the website for Partnership for a Healthier America, one of their directives around eradicating childhood obesity is for military readiness. Is to create a fighting force, right? So the idea of losing weight, losing 10 pounds as a patriotic gesture was because it was creating a sort of collective panic response to terrorist threats in that Americans need to be ready and fat Americans are not ready, right? So that was the directive. And it was coming from us to from Health and Human Services, right, at the federal level. And when that happened, reality media around weight loss, workplace wellness programs, incentives for people to lose weight, even withholding of insurance coverage, but like all of that really proliferates in the early part of the 2000s. Most of my students were not born yet and or not conscious when 9/11 occurred. So they're like, hey, take your tinfoil hat off. And I'm like, no, you have to understand, like 9/11 really matters in shaping where we are now in our conceptualizations of how we talk about obesity as a disease. What epidemic, what a paradox. It's an epidemic. And our solution to this is individualized personal responsibility of eat better, eat less, move more. To me, that is just egregious, like in terms of looking at something like what the USDA supplements, what they subsidize, just corn and soy and cow's milk and dairy products, right? Like it really is. I teach food politics too. I spend a lot of time feeling sad, just about some of how our systems work. Yeah, right on. Totally. I do want to iterate again. It is such an honor to have been invited. I really believe in crossing the hallway. We have to share knowledge with each other. That is so important because we are invested in health outcomes for people, for patients, on a macro level, on a micro level, all of it. Oh, we gotta go. We gotta go.
I don't have a question, I have just a comment. I just really appreciate you coming and sharing your experience, wisdom, and I think that's staying curious and understanding, the entire context in which we care for patients first. Really appreciate it. I do think we don't stop.
Yes, we do.
We're gonna come back.